There was like basically looking at the effect of different speeds and the involvement of certain muscle groups. And certainly you look at that uptick, like, you know, calf and soleus is just constantly sort of banging on at these sort of slow to moderate speeds. Hamstrings, bang, as soon as you're hitting sort of, 25 Ks an hour plus, you know, it all of a sudden rips in with hip flexor and everything else kind of sort of dulls down. Is that kind of similar to what you're sort of saying there?
Yeah, correct. And so I think, you know, people talk about, you know, their high-speed running exposures being at above 80% of max velocity as an example. And if it's above 80%, you just don't know how much of that gets into that upper end. And there's a balance there. You know, there's always a risk associated with running fast, but the more often that you do it and expose individuals to it, the better they're likely to be able to tolerate it.
And that'll be different too, obviously. Like running fast for me is 16 Ks an hour. But, you know, like,
Sorry.
Thanks, Phil. And I'd probably only last about 10 metres. But then, you know, like obviously elite footballers are getting up 35 Ks an hour, 40 Ks an hour. So, and even then community level football, so the lower standards are obviously getting slower and slower, but they're still hitting top speed. So it's all obviously relative. And so probably that intensity effort, 90, 95, 100% is probably a better way to look at things rather than saying, okay, you've hit 17 Ks an hour, 18, you're running at moderate pace. That could be flat out for that particular person. So
I mean, that's the advice we typically work off, is relative speed.
And I think that's certainly what happens in our world because of the use of GPS. Every player knows their maximum velocity. I deal in metres per second, so I'm probably going to be a little bit out with. But certainly each player knows what their maximum velocity is, and certainly once a week. I was actually just looking at some of our performance reports earlier on today, and it's certainly once a week we have, and I counted them. There was one person that didn't hit over 95%, and we do a really, really sound athletic warm up and preparation to train, and they're hitting their close to top speed 3 or 4 times in that warm up. Certainly once a week, but they're also hitting some really good intensity in the other 2 training sessions as well. So we're not afraid of intensity. I think there's got to be a balance between volume and intensity. The other thing I would say, I think it was Malone with the Gaelic football stuff early on, talking about maybe it was 3 to 4 times a week you've got to hit over 95%, like from memory. And I think that's probably some sound advice. But I think the other thing that we also consider is the volume of high-speed running. So we would classify high-speed running as over 5.5 metres a second generally, but it will be different for each individuals, and sprint zone is above 7 metres a second. And so we also want our players to be hitting really good volumes of high speed run and also really good volumes of sprint run. And there'll be obviously a lot less sprint run, but just say for one of our really, really good fast players, they might be hitting 500 metres above 7 metres a second in a training session. And that's great. I think that gives you really good protection. So I think that for me, high speed running in a high speed in a elite performance program is vitally important. And I can't say that it's more important than the other things that we do, but it would nearly it'd be close. The other thing we've started to look at now as well is acceleration. You know, we are measuring, the GPS is able to measure high acceleration zones and lower acceleration zones. The rate of acceleration, there's not much data out there at the moment, but I think that there probably will be. How you accelerate, whether you accelerate from a standing start or whether you accelerate whilst moving. Things like the speed of, when you went a different direction. Certainly in football, we're not talking about track and field here. These guys are running fast and they're not necessarily running in a straight line. And they're running fast and having to bend down at speed to pick up a ground ball. So there are a lot of things, I think, in a training program that need to be considered, not just, let's hit 3 or 4, 95%
runs.
I think that's maybe a little bit too simplistic. It'll probably help, but it might not cover everything.
Exactly right. And what about you, Mel?
I agree. From the women's perspective, obviously the numbers are looking a little bit different. Our female athletes are not hitting the top speeds that the men are hitting. Like, if we look at some of our athletes, and sorry, but we're talking kilometres per hour, but so a bit confusing, but some of our top athletes are getting up to around the 30k per hour for their top end speed. We also, our approach is the gym builds your capacity, so it's an important perspective, but then football or AFL, it's a running sport. You have to run, so you have to have running capacity, and it really is an important part of how we approach our training blocks and pre-season, in-season. We think about the game profile of our players, so what do our players have to hit in terms of high-speed running, total running and top-end running in a game, and then how can we best prepare them for that. So for our girls, the top end running, so that's what I think you were calling the sprint, our girls are only doing that about 150 metres per game. So but the high speed, so the lower bracket, they're hitting about 2.5k. So we need to prepare our athletes for that. And knowledge, our approaches around running and sprinting is about, we microdose it through the week, so we break it up. It's well planned. We bring the coaches in on the planning. We try and get it into the drill. So the drill planning is really important, and being lucky enough to have the same staff for a few years, we've spent a lot of time trying to develop that drill library and where we can get that running in drills. So then we only have to do top-up running if we're not hitting those numbers. And then the other thing, open and close drills, that sort of thing. And then we try and avoid spikes in our running load. So we try and, in the off-season we have not lots of access to the girls. We're getting better at making sure they're doing their running, but we're not monitoring them with GPS. So it's so important in the AFLW space when they come back to the club, we cannot just dive into that stuff straight away. We have to plan and grade the exposure. Otherwise we're going to be in trouble.